In 1453, a 21-year-old ruler stood before the most impregnable city in the world and decided he would either take it or be forgotten by history. The city had survived sieges for over 1,000 years. Armies had broken against its walls. Emperors had tried and failed. Yet this young sultan believed he was destined to succeed where all others had not. His name was Mehmed II, later known as Mehmed the Conqueror. He ruled the rising Ottoman state, a power straddling Europe and Asia, ambitious but not yet dominant. Before him stood Constantinople, the capital of the Byzantine Empire, protected by massive triple-layered walls and centuries of legend. To conquer it was not simply to win a battle, it was to reshape the balance of power between Christianity and Islam, between East and West, between medieval and early modern worlds. But Mehmed's story did not begin at those walls. It began years earlier, with a child placed on a throne before he was ready, surrounded by rivals, doubted by allies, and underestimated by enemies. Many believed he was too young, too idealistic, too inexperienced to threaten an empire that had endured since the time of Constantine. They were wrong, and the decisions he would make in the years that followed would not only bring down a 1,000-year-old empire, but also lay the foundation for one that would dominate 3 continents for centuries.
In the early 15th century, the map of the Eastern Mediterranean was fractured and unstable. The once mighty Byzantine Empire had been reduced to little more than the city of Constantinople and a scattering of territories in southern Greece. To the west, kingdoms like Hungary and the Maritime Republic of Venice watched events anxiously. To the east and south, the rising Ottoman state pressed steadily forward, expanding across Anatolia and deep into the Balkans. The Ottomans had begun as one of many small frontier principalities in northwestern Anatolia in the late 13th century. Under leaders like Osman I and Orhan, they expanded at the expense of weakened Byzantine frontier lands. By the time of Sultan Murad I and Bayezid I, the Ottomans had crossed into Europe, establishing a capital at Edirne and defeating regional powers in decisive battles. Their victory at Kosovo in 1389, an expansion into Bulgaria and Serbia, signaled that a new imperial force had arrived. Yet the Ottoman advance was not unstoppable. In 1402, Sultan Bayezid I was defeated and captured by the Central Asian conqueror Timur at the Battle of Ankara. The empire nearly collapsed into civil war as Bayezid's sons fought for succession. This period, known as the Ottoman Interregnum, exposed the fragility beneath rapid expansion. It took years of internal struggle before Mehmed I restored unity and stabilized the state. By the time Murad II, Mehmed's father, came to power, the empire had regained strength. Murad faced rebellions in Anatolia and repeated crusading efforts from Christian coalitions in Europe. In 1444, a crusader army led by forces from Hungary and Poland advanced into Ottoman territory, encouraged by promises of support from Western Christendom. At the Battle of Varna, Murad decisively defeated them, killing King Władysław III of Poland and Hungary. A second coalition was crushed at the Second Battle of Kosovo in 1448. These victories cemented Ottoman dominance in the Balkans and discouraged large-scale European crusades for decades. Amid these conflicts, Constantinople endured in isolation. Once the heart of the Roman Empire, the city had been the center of Eastern Orthodox Christianity and Mediterranean commerce for centuries. Its Theodosian walls, constructed in the 5th century, were considered nearly impenetrable. Though its population had declined dramatically since its medieval peak, the city still possessed symbolic power far beyond its reduced territory. It was the last remnant of the Roman imperial tradition, a living link to antiquity. For the Ottomans, Constantinople was more than symbolic prize. The city sat between their European and Anatolian territories, interrupting full control of the Bosporus Strait. Byzantine emperors, though weakened, could still ally with Western powers or stir unrest among Ottoman rivals. As long as Constantinople remained independent, the Ottoman state was geographically divided and strategically vulnerable. It was into this volatile world that Mehmed II was born in 1432. As a prince, he received an education shaped by both Islamic scholarship and imperial ambition. He studied theology, languages, military science, and classical history. Some accounts suggest he was particularly influenced by prophecies attributed in Islamic tradition to the Prophet Muhammad, which spoke of the eventual conquest of Constantinople. Whether interpreted literally or politically, such ideas reinforced the city's importance in Ottoman imagination. In 1444, at just 12 years old, Mehmed was placed on the throne when his father temporarily abdicated. The decision was controversial. Powerful viziers doubted the boy's readiness, and external enemies saw an opportunity. When a new Crusader army marched against the Ottomans, the young sultan reportedly urged his father to return and lead the army. Murad resumed command, defeated the Crusaders at Varna, and later reclaimed the throne permanently. This episode left a deep impression on Mehmed. He had tasted authority, but also witnessed how quickly it could be challenged. He had seen European powers unite when they sensed weakness, and he had observed the delicate balance between youthful ambition and experienced statecraft. When Murad II died in 1451, Mehmed became sultan again, this time at 19 years old. Many European leaders remembered the uncertainty of his first reign and assumed the young ruler would be manageable. The Byzantine emperor, Constantine XI, sought to negotiate, hoping to maintain fragile peace. Venice and Genoa calculated their commercial interests. Hungary and other Balkan states watched cautiously. But Mehmed had been preparing for this moment. He understood that the survival and transformation of his empire depended on decisive action. Constantinople was no longer just a distant dream or a religious aspiration. It was a strategic necessity. The world around him was shifting, and he intended to be the one who would shape its next chapter.
When Mehmed II took the throne in 1451, he moved quickly and deliberately. He first secured his position at home, eliminating potential rivals in accordance with Ottoman succession practices. He confirmed key officials in their posts, but made it clear that authority now flowed from him alone. Stability within the empire was his first weapon. Then he turned his attention to Constantinople. The Byzantine Emperor Constantine XI understood the danger. The empire he ruled was a shadow of its former self, its territory reduced largely to the capital and parts of the Morea in southern Greece. Yet its walls still stood, and its name still carried weight across Christian Europe. Mehmed began with diplomacy, renewing peace treaties to buy time. He assured Venice and other powers that their trade would be respected. But while letters moved across courts, preparations were already underway. In 1452, he ordered the construction of a massive fortress on the European side of the Bosporus, directly opposite an earlier Ottoman stronghold. This new fortress, later known as Rumeli Hisari, was not merely symbolic. It allowed the Ottomans to control naval traffic through the strait, cutting Constantinople off from potential aid from the Black Sea.
When a Venetian ship attempted to defy the new restrictions, Ottoman artillery sank it. The message was unmistakable. The city was being encircled. At the same time, Mehmed invested heavily in artillery. Gunpowder weapons had existed for decades, but their use against major fortifications was still evolving. A Hungarian engineer named Orban offered his services to the Byzantines first, proposing to build enormous cannons capable of breaching the Theodosian walls. Lacking funds, the Byzantines declined. Mehmed accepted. Orban's Great Bombard, along with other large cannons, was cast in bronze and transported with immense difficulty to the Ottoman lines. Contemporary accounts describe teams of oxen and hundreds of men dragging the weapons across rough terrain. The logistical effort was staggering, but Mehmed believed the walls that had stood for 1,000 years could finally be broken. Inside Constantinople, preparations were desperate but determined. Constantine XI appealed to Western Europe for aid. Some ships and volunteers arrived, including Genoese forces under Giovanni Giustiniani. But large-scale military support did not materialize. The fall of previous crusading efforts and political divisions in Europe limited enthusiasm for another costly campaign. The defenders numbered perhaps 7,000 to 8,000 men, including foreign contingents. They faced an Ottoman army that modern estimates place between 50,000 and 80,000, including elite janissaries, provincial troops, and irregular forces. The imbalance was severe, but morale inside the city remained resilient. The walls had saved Constantinople before. Many believed they would do so again. On April 6, 1453, the Ottoman siege began. Ottoman artillery opened fire on the land walls. The thunder of cannon echoed across the fields, shaking stone and spirit alike. Each day, bombardments targeted specific sections, particularly near the gate of St. Romanus. The walls were thick and resilient, but they were not designed to withstand sustained gunpowder assault. The defenders worked tirelessly at night, repairing breaches with earth, timber, and rubble. Each morning, the bombardment resumed. Weeks passed in this brutal rhythm. The cannons sometimes cracked or misfired, and their rate of fire was slow, but the psychological effect was profound. The myth of invulnerability was being tested in real time. Mehmed did not rely on artillery alone. He ordered naval operations to challenge the great chain that blocked the entrance to the Golden Horn. Ottoman ships attempted frontal assaults but were repelled. The Byzantine fleet, though small, held the inner harbor with the protection of the chain. For a moment, it seemed the sea might remain secure. Then Mehmed made a bold decision. In late April, he ordered ships to be hauled overland on greased logs from the Bosporus into the Golden Horn, bypassing the chain entirely. The maneuver was complex and risky, but it succeeded. When Ottoman ships appeared inside the harbor, the defenders were stunned. The city was now threatened from multiple fronts. As the siege continued into May, pressure mounted on both sides. Food shortages worsened inside Constantinople. Religious processions moved through the streets as clergy and citizens prayed for deliverance. Outside, Mehmed maintained discipline in his camp, aware that prolonged siege could strain his own supply lines and morale. Assaults were launched at weakened sections of the walls, but the defenders, led in part by Giustiniani, repelled them. Casualties mounted, yet each failed assault revealed weaknesses. Each repaired breach was more fragile than before. Mehmed studied the defenses carefully, adjusting his strategy. By late May, a significant breach had opened near the gate of St. Romanus. Artillery had reduced portions of the outer wall to rubble. Mehmed prepared for a final coordinated assault. Waves of irregular troops would exhaust the defenders. Then Anatolian units would press harder. Finally, the elite janissaries would strike the decisive blow. Inside the city, Constantine XI made his own preparations.
He reportedly addressed his commanders and reaffirmed his resolve to defend the city to the end. There would be no surrender. The fate of Constantinople, and perhaps of an entire civilization, now rested on the outcome of the next attack. In the early hours of May 29, 1453, the Ottoman army advanced. Drums and horns sounded across the darkness. The first waves attacked and were pushed back with heavy losses. The second wave followed, fighting fiercely amid rubble and smoke. The defenders were exhausted, but they held. Then the Janissaries moved forward. Disciplined and relentless, they targeted the most vulnerable section of the wall. Around this moment, Giovanni Giustiniani was severely wounded and carried from the battlefield. His withdrawal shook defender morale at a critical point. The breach widened. As dawn approached, Ottoman troops gained a foothold inside the outer defenses. Fighting erupted within the city itself. Constantine XI is believed to have died in combat near the walls, though the exact circumstances remain debated by historians. By mid-morning, Ottoman banners were raised above the city. The Theodosian walls had fallen. A 1,000-year-old empire had come to an end, and Mehmed II, still only 21, had accomplished what generations before him could not. But the true weight of that moment was only beginning to unfold. By the morning of May 29, 1453, the outcome was no longer in doubt. Ottoman forces had forced their way through the shattered defenses near the gate of St. Romanus. The defenders, exhausted after weeks of bombardment and repeated assaults, could not regroup fast enough. Once the inner lines were breached, the structure of resistance collapsed rapidly. Emperor Constantine XI is believed to have removed his imperial insignia and entered the fighting as an ordinary soldier. Contemporary sources differ on the precise details of his death, but most agree he was killed during the final defense of the city. With his fall, the Byzantine Empire effectively ceased to exist. There was no heir in Constantinople, no organized command to rally the remaining troops. Ottoman units spread through the streets, securing strategic points and opening the city gates to allow more soldiers inside. For several hours, chaos followed. According to established siege custom of the time, the city was subjected to looting. Churches, homes, and public buildings were entered by soldiers seeking spoils. Civilians were captured, and many were enslaved, a tragic but common practice in medieval warfare. By midday, Mehmed II entered Constantinople. He rode toward the city's symbolic heart, the great cathedral of Hagia Sophia. The massive structure, once the centerpiece of Eastern Orthodox Christianity, had become a refuge for thousands of civilians during the assault. Mehmed ordered the building secured and later converted into a mosque, signaling a profound shift in the city's religious and political identity. Yet the Sultan also moved quickly to impose order. He curtailed the looting sooner than the full 3 days traditionally permitted. He recognized that this was not merely a conquered city to be plundered, but a capital to be claimed. Constantinople would not be destroyed, it would be transformed. In the days that followed, Mehmed began consolidating control. He declared the city the new capital of the Ottoman state. Surviving Byzantine officials who pledged loyalty were allowed to retain positions under Ottoman authority. Crucially, Mehmed appointed Gennadius Scholarius as the new patriarch of Constantinople, re-establishing the Orthodox Church under Ottoman protection. This decision signaled a pragmatic approach. Religious communities would be governed within their own structures so long as they acknowledged Ottoman supremacy. The fall of Constantinople was not simply the capture of a city. It marked the definitive end of the Roman imperial tradition that had endured in Eastern form for over a millennium. The psychological shock reverberated across Europe. For many Christians, the loss was catastrophic, both spiritually and strategically. For the Ottomans, it was validation of their imperial destiny. Militarily, the siege demonstrated the growing power of gunpowder artillery against even the strongest medieval fortifications. The Theodosian walls had resisted countless assaults for centuries. In 1453, sustained cannon fire changed the equation. Historians often view this moment as symbolic of a broader transformation in warfare, where new technology began to render old defensive systems obsolete. For Mehmed himself, the conquest sealed his reputation. He adopted the title Kaiser-i Rum, Caesar of Rome, asserting continuity with the Roman imperial legacy. This claim was both political and symbolic. By taking Constantinople, he positioned the Ottoman state not as a regional power, but as a universal empire. The turning point was irreversible. The city that once stood as a barrier between continents was now the center of a rapidly expanding Ottoman world. The balance of power in southeastern Europe had shifted decisively, and from the ruins of Byzantium, a new imperial capital began to rise under a young sultan who had changed the course of history.
In the immediate aftermath of the conquest, Mehmed II faced a city that was both a prize and a challenge. Constantinople had been depopulated by decades of decline and the violence of the siege. Entire districts stood empty, markets were silent, and infrastructure was damaged. If the city was to become the heart of an empire, it had to be rebuilt almost from the ground up. Mehmed launched an ambitious program of reconstruction and repopulation. He encouraged Muslims, Christians, and Jews from across the empire to settle in the new capital. Families were relocated from Anatolia and the Balkans. Artisans were brought in to revive trade, and religious communities were granted protected status under Ottoman rule. Over time, the city regained vitality and became known increasingly as Istanbul, the political and cultural center of a vast realm. Administratively, Mehmed strengthened the imperial structure. He expanded the role of the devshirme system, recruiting Christian boys from the Balkans to serve in state and military roles, including the elite Janissary Corps. He reorganized legal codes, blending Islamic law with sultanic decrees to centralize authority. These reforms reinforced the sultan's control and professionalized the machinery of empire. The conquest also altered global dynamics. With Constantinople under Ottoman control, trade routes between Europe and Asia were influenced by Ottoman policies and taxation. Some historians argue that the shifting balance of power in the Eastern Mediterranean contributed indirectly to Western European exploration, as maritime powers like Portugal and Spain sought alternative routes to Asia. While this was not the sole cause of the age of exploration, the fall of the city intensified the strategic urgency. In southeastern Europe, Ottoman expansion continued. Mehmed campaigned in Serbia, Bosnia, and the Morea, consolidating control over former Byzantine and Balkan territories. He challenged Venice for dominance in the Aegean and pushed into Albania, where resistance under leaders like Skanderbeg proved formidable. The conquest of Constantinople was not an end point, but a launching point for further imperial ambition. Culturally, the transformation of Constantinople into an Ottoman capital created a unique synthesis. Byzantine architectural traditions influenced Ottoman mosque design. Greek scholars who fled the city contributed to intellectual currents in Renaissance Italy, though the extent of this influence remains debated among historians. Within the empire, diverse communities coexisted under the millet system, shaping a multi-ethnic imperial identity that would endure for centuries. Mehmed II ruled until 1481, leaving behind a state far larger and more centralized than the one he inherited. His capture of Constantinople became a defining moment in both Ottoman and European historical memory. For the Ottomans, it symbolized fulfillment and legitimacy. For Europe, it marked the definitive end of the medieval Roman world. The city he conquered would remain the Ottoman capital until the empire's dissolution in the early 20th century. Its fall in 1453 is often used by historians as a symbolic boundary between the Middle Ages and the early modern era. Whether viewed as an ending or a beginning, the consequences of Mehmed's victory reshaped politics, religion, commerce, and warfare on a global scale.
When Mehmed II stood inside Constantinople in 1453, he was not simply claiming a city, he was closing one chapter of history and opening another. A millennium of Byzantine rule ended in a single morning, yet from its foundations rose an empire that would command 3 continents. The fall of Constantinople reminds us that no power, however ancient, is immune to change. Mehmed was only 21 when he achieved what generations before him had failed to do. His victory was built on preparation, strategy, technology, and relentless determination. It reshaped trade routes, altered the balance between Europe and the Islamic world, and accelerated transformations already underway. The echoes of that conquest can still be felt in the cultural and political landscape of modern Istanbul and beyond. History often turns on individuals who recognize their moment and seize it. But it also turns on larger forces, such as economics, belief, innovation, and ambition. Mehmed the Conqueror stood at the intersection of all of them, and he understood that hesitation would mean irrelevance. So consider this: was the fall of Constantinople inevitable, or did it depend entirely on the will of one young sultan? Share your thoughts in the comments. If you found this journey through history compelling, support the channel with a like and subscribe for more stories where the past comes alive with depth and clarity.